The greatest challenge we have as metal musicians and guitar players, it's not playing guitar or learning this song or writing a song or singing. It's in the studio. In fact, I get more questions about my studio setup than anything else. And that's why we are gonna show you how to build your own home recording studio from start to finish, showing you every component. Now I say we because I've brought on a special guest today, my good friend Ken Candelas. He's been in the music industry for quite some time, has a wealth of knowledge in the studio. He's also the mastermind behind the New York-based band Homerik. So Ken, thank you for coming on today, dude. And before we dive into all this, just if you don't mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Thanks so much, Jason. Dude, super excited to be here today, man. Well, I'm an artist. I've been in the project Homerik since 2014 and started making that while I was in college, sandboxing and learning music production. So today, I'm a working audio engineer. I'm also an educator at SAE Institute of Technology here in New York City. And I freelance on gigs like Good Morning America and working all over the city, just, doing what I love to do. Production is just part of my everyday life, and I'm happy to teach others how to do it. And I love making music, and that's comes down to, how everything started for me. I was an art major in high school, and before then I was a big lover of video games. So I started making music inspired by video games, and it's very thematic, and this kind of stuff just helps me, get through my day by feeling really epic.
Wow, dude, that is awesome. So guys, you're about to get a wealth of knowledge in this video on how to build your own home recording studio. So how this is gonna flow is I'm basically gonna break down my studio here, everything I have in here that I record with. After I share a piece, Ken's gonna come on and say, Jason, yeah, that's cool, man, but you could do this better, or Jason, dude, that completely sucks, don't use that, and use this instead. Now, I think this might be the most important component of your home recording studio, and that's your computer. Now, I'm running an iMac. This is the 27-inch iMac. Wasn't the most expensive one, but it wasn't the cheapest one, so whatever that is. But Ken, dude, what do you have and what do you recommend as far as computers and the appropriate machine to run your studio with?
Hey, that's a great question, Jason. Well, I actually run a Hackintosh. It's not the most kosher setup, but it is definitely a very powerful custom setup, which for someone like me, it's a beautiful thing. I have the ability to run Macintosh software on Windows parts. And to me, Windows parts has always been way more powerful, way more customizable. And on a Macintosh, if you were to run Windows software, it would be essentially the same thing as what I'm doing here, except you would only be using Macintosh compatible parts. So I like the ability to have Windows and Windows parts for that matter. But for the everyday consumer, I mean, it's really up to you. If you're into customizability, actually running Windows in today's music production world is not really so far-fetched. Windows is way more customizable now and easier to use than ever before. And I guess, both Mac and Windows have really elevated their game over the past couple of years. But I don't know, man. I just feel like when things started in the production world, a lot of things were really tailored to Mac. That's why Mac is so dominant in the music production industry. But nowadays, you can go between either one. And when I first built my Hackintosh, it was really hard to get the Mac side going at first. But I was getting so familiar with working on Windows that I honestly didn't really even miss it. Now I have it as the luxury to really work between the two. And I also had all my old data on my Macintosh. So I was doing a bit of a transfer as well. But now I can work between either one, and I don't really have any preference as to which one is better or worse. So really, it's up to you and your workflow. If you prefer Mac and you want to stick to something easy to work with, Macintosh is a great way to do it. And if you also prefer Windows, by all means, go for it. I just feel that if you are going to get into music production, though, you really need to have something with at least 16 gigabytes of RAM. I really highly recommend a 1 terabyte SSD drive. And also, as a really great rule of thumb, your stuff doesn't exist unless it's in 3 places. So get yourself extra hard drive to back up your data. Super essential.
All right, guys, the next component of your home recording studio I want to talk about is, and this is kind of a debatable topic here, is what's the best recording software for you to use, especially if you're a metal guitarist or a metal vocalist or just into metal in general. Now, I'll share what I've been using since about 2010-ish, and this is when I first got into recording with software, which was quite a learning curve for this old dude here. But I've been using Presonus Studio One Pro for many, many years now, and I think it's like anything. Once you dig in and kind of learn how to use it, it's like riding a bike or like playing guitar. You never really forget how to do it. Anyway, so I've been using that application for all these years, since the beginning. But Ken, dude, I'd like to know, or we'd like to know, what you use and what you recommend for recording, specifically for metal music.
Metal is, to me, it's more efficient to work on something like Pro Tools. I've always used Pro Tools. I've worked with Logic too. However, with programs like Logic, I feel like there are things going under the hood that I don't necessarily want to happen. For example, in a case where you're trying to send a signal from one track to another, I don't like the fact that Logic goes ahead and has things done for you. I like to do it all myself. That way I know exactly the entire flow of my signal and how it's all working within the program. Pro Tools doesn't do anything for you. You have to tell it what to do, and it will do everything that you want it to do. I know guys that use stuff also like Reaper. Reaper is actually great for stability, so I prefer to use something like that in a live scenario. Pro Tools tends to have kind of a bit of a hiccup moment during recording sessions. It'll sometimes pause, just either because your buffer size isn't too large, or you have some other interruption. It's a very, very picky program, but it does so much for me that I just love it for it. But hey, broadcast, we've used Reaper, we've used other programs other than Pro Tools, Ableton Live also. But it's the standard in the industry to use Pro Tools. That's what I recommend. I myself am certified by Avid as a Pro Tools user, so I can't recommend it highly enough. That's really my opinion. And for metal, you can use anything that you like, that you're familiar with. But Pro Tools, to me, is the best tracking software out there, and for mixing as well.
All right, guys, so we've got the computer, we have got the recording software. Now we need to connect those two so that we can record our instruments or voice or drums or whatever it is that we're recording. You can record goats too. Bah. All right, so I started out with like a super cheap, like $99 interface. I started out with the Presonus Audio Box USB, but I upgraded about a year ago. I think I recorded my first 3 albums with this thing, but about a year ago, I upgraded to the Presonus Quantum 2 interface. To be honest with you guys, I don't really see any difference in quality. I mean, I just wanted to upgrade, I guess, to upgrade. I don't even know if that was necessary. But anyway, so I'm running the Presonus Quantum 2. There is a lot more features. I probably only use a third of them, if that. So Ken, dude, we'd like to know what interface you use and what type of interface you recommend. And me personally, I'd like to know, is it really worth it to get a super expensive interface, as opposed to going to, with something that's kind of simple and cheap?
Jason, that's a great question. I personally use Antelope Audio as my preferred choice of interface. Specifically, I'm using their Discrete 8 Synergy Core. It's one of their latest interfaces. It's got Thunderbolt capability, USB 3.0, and honestly, this bad boy is so rock solid. I mean, I've been using Antelope since I was an intern at Masterdisc, and Masterdisc had Antelope audio really anywhere in every studio. It's got the best clocks that you can find on the market. And why is that so important? Well, here's the thing. When you're working in digital, the key component about digital recording is the converter. If you're going to capture the best quality, you want the best converter as well. Now, one of the other key points about Antelope that I think is phenomenal is that they have a virtual mic system where I could use their interfaces, their converters, and also use their mic system in order to change the vocal sound or whatever I'm recording just by a click of a button. And it's so clean, man. It's really important to have a really great quality interface, in my opinion, if you're serious about this kind of stuff. The conversion from analog to digital and from digital to analog for my speakers, of course. I have heard many types of interfaces. I haven't heard one as good as this one for its price point. And man, I'm hearing so much more in my mix than I've ever had before. And it's changed the way I've worked.
All right, guys, now we're going to talk about monitors. Hey, I'm monitoring your progress. Are you practicing every day? Now, I've been running the KRK Rokit G5s, and I've been running those since about 2010 when I first jumped into recording. In fact, like when I bought my interface and software and all that, I also bought the KRKs as well at that same time. Ken, we'd really love to know your thoughts on studio monitors.
Monitors are super paramount in your recording studio. I can't think of one recording studio that doesn't have a great set of monitors. Now, why are they so important? Why can't I just use headphones? Well, here's the thing. Sound physically moves molecules. Especially if you're working on something, let's say in dance or EDM, you need to be able to feel that air pushing against your body. So you hear things differently with speakers. Certain frequencies become a little bit more prevalent when you're hearing on speakers rather than headphones. You want to get that full experience. Now, there are trade-offs to speakers and headphones. Headphones are a lot more accurate, and you can really get detail without having to worry about your room acoustics. And that's because, the drivers are right by your ear. But speakers, it's a totally different ball game, and you need to be able to A/B on both. Now, in my studio, I have actually two sets of speakers, and I like to have one for reference and the other one just to check my mix as, hey, this was on a TV or something of the sort. So to my right over here is my Dunlavy SC1s. It's a more of a vintage type of speaker, but Dunlavy has been known to be in mastering rooms. So the quality is impeccable. I really hear into the depths of my mix, and the sound stage is just super wide on something like this. And then to my left, I have a classic set of Auratones, which are single driver, and they have only they have sort of like a little bit of a boxy, almost like an NS10 sound. Now, NS10s were very famous in studios just to really mix heavily on, so that, you know, if you mix right on the NS10s, you can have a good mix anywhere. Auratones are kind of a similar deal for me. Now, for anyone who's trying to get into this sort of thing, I do highly recommend something like Atom Audio or Focal. They do have entry-level speakers. Those are great brands to start with, and they will last you a good amount of time before you feel like you may need to even upgrade. I also know somebody who's been doing post-production and has been working on a set of Behringers for the longest of time. It's all a matter of how well do you know your speakers and how well do you know them within the context of your room. So your acoustics play a major role into the learning of your speakers, because as you are working on your speakers, you'll notice that there are certain things that pop in and out of your mix that you may have not otherwise seen or heard. I mean, you know, it's really it all depends on how long have you been listening to the speakers in your room. Now, one other thing, I also use calibration software. My favorite is SonarWorks. After I've treated my room, I've built all the treatment in here with my significant other, Elizabeth, and we have also calibrated the speakers to this room. SonarWorks has a great program to help make your speakers be as truthful as possible to the music. And that can only be really effective if you have a treated room. If it's an untreated room, it can do something, but if you have reflections inside the room, those reflections are still going to be there. So it helps to put a little bit of a buffer or baffle in your room just to tame some of the echoes and slapbacks that are inside. So it's a trade-off of how well do you know your room, how well do you know your speakers. One teacher once told me that in order to be a master at something, you need to have at least 10,000 hours invested into that craft. So the more you work with your speakers, the better you will be at mixing on those speakers. It's up to you how far you want to really take it.
Now this ties in with monitors as well, and that is headphones. Sorry, I can't hear you. Now I don't use headphones that often, but I do use them anytime I'm miking something. If I'm miking a guitar amp or if I'm doing vocals here in the studio, you have to use headphones for that because you don't want the mic picking up the noise from your monitors. I shouldn't call it noise, the music. Anyway, so I've got the KRK KNS 6400 headphones, 6400. So Ken, what is your recommendation for studio headphones?
Hey, I love Sennheiser. Sennheiser has been really, really good to me ever since I've used them in the early days of my education on audio. Now, these headphones, I have Sennheiser HD700s. They are just, I think, one model away from their flagship line, if I'm not mistaken. And I got these actually used, which is great. That means they were already broken in, and I just started listening to them, and I found them to be super helpful when I am mixing in quiet places. They're open back headphones, so they actually make sound around the headphones outside of the listener cup. So in my opinion, it's good to get a great set of open back headphones for mixing. Now, if you want to keep things quiet and you want to have the isolation, then I also do recommend having a set of closed headphones. These are Sony NDR 7506 headphones. These are classic headphones. They are great for when I'm doing vocal takes and the listener can have the headphones on them. There's no bleed and they sound amazing. So having one or two sets of headphones, if sound is, if leakage is a is an issue for you, get some closed headphones of a good quality. And if you really want to take it to the next level, open back headphones really help with the clarity in your mix. It sounds more open. It feels just a little bit more spacious. You can get a little bit more of the detail right in your mix. On top of that, just to give a thumbs up to SonarWorks, man, they also have calibrations for headphones as well. So you could get a great set of headphones, calibrate those headphones, and now you are just listening in euphoria, really.
Now we're getting to the good stuff, guys. I mean, all this is good stuff, but we're gonna talk about guitars, recording your guitars. So there's two things I'm gonna go over real quickly here. One is what many people are using these days, and that's the virtual amps and effects. Things like Positive Grid's Bias FX or in Bias Amp. You've got, Neural DSP. They have some really awesome sims, the Fortin NTS. Yeah, so that's kind of like what a lot of modern guitar players are using because, hey, it's convenient. And you guys can see I'm in like a small, like 10 by 11 room here, so it's not really feasible to crank up a half stack or anything. But you also want to be able to mic your amps as well. So here, I've just got the good old SM57 mic. I know there's like, I guess, better mics or more expensive mics. But Ken, dude, what is your thought on both of these components?
SM57 is a great choice when you're micing guitars. It's the classic sound. Also, if you're looking into other types of mics for guitar, I highly recommend an Electro Voice RE20 or a Sennheiser MD421. These are great amp mic choices for your collection if you're interested in those. Now, great point. Really difficult to record a half stack in an apartment. Especially here in New York City, where you get neighbors in just about every corner. So I really value having the ability to reamp my dry guitar signals. So what I do is, and this is actually a functionality of my interface here, where I can record a dry signal, run it through simulations just for playback purposes, just to record and get the vibe. But then I can also reamp that signal later and fine tune the tone of the amplifier that I'm recording and mic it perfectly. It's a convenient tool. I can have the best of both worlds. So, in some of these higher quality interfaces, you will find this ability to reamp your guitars or fretted instruments or any of these instruments really that can plug in. It's unbelievable. I mean, the technology that is around today, and especially with amp simulations and plugins, we have come across companies like Universal Audio. Antelope also has their own effects processors, and you have Native Instruments. These are great sources to find tone that really you can actually work and blend them with a real amplifier, which I often do. I like to take the DI or direct injection signal of my guitar, run that through an external amp from a reamp session, and also in the mix, keep the dry guitar with a simulated amp on it as well. That I find is a really great blend of color. I get the nice, thick, real saturation and movement of air from an amplifier, and then I also get the wonderful capability of blending that with a virtual tone that sounds really almost just as good. Even in places like Good Morning America, we find a lot of people using Kemper or fractal amplifier technology to emulate what they've had at home perfectly. And it's a perfect recording or a perfect model of their amplifier. and it becomes really useful, especially in live.
Now let's talk about the ego part of your home recording studio, and that's recording your vocalist. Guys, I'm totally kidding. Actually, us guitar players probably have just as big as ego as the singer. Here's my vocal setup. Now, I just dove into recording vocals in the studio, recording this last album that I released, Masterpiece, in 2019. And per the research I did for the budget I was in, the Shure SM7B was like just hands down the mic. Now keep in mind that, you know, I was wanting to record death metal vocals, but I also wanted something that was going to handle, you know, other types of vocals as well, because my last album has got, you know, about 4 different vocal styles. Now, a couple more components I want to mention here that I got. You see the little filter in front of the mic, but more importantly, you see this shield behind the mic there, and that's the, I think that's the SE Electronics Reflexion. This is a good thing to have if you have an untreated room. That way you don't have your sounds bouncing all over the walls and stuff like that. And even in a treated room, I think even in a treated room, if you don't have like a dedicated vocal booth, I think I'd recommend getting something like this. Now, Ken, what are your thoughts on recording vocals and mics, and like you see my setup here? I'd love to know your thoughts on that and also what you use.
Hey Jason, your microphone of choice is also a well-known studio workhorse. The SM7B has been used on countless records, everything from the Red Hot Chili Peppers to Metallica. That's a classic microphone, and it's a great one to have in your arsenal. Now, I have a bit of trouble trying to pick one microphone that does it all. I mean, you can get, you know, a Neumann U87, but I mean, that costs like $3,000 and plus. And so that's kind of not necessarily feasible in my budget to find one microphone that costs so much that if something were to happen to it, oh my God, it'd be detrimental. Now I'm kind of sounding like a bit of a fanboy, but to be honest, I really am. Antelope, their virtual microphone system, freaking amazing, man. But I didn't first hear it from them. I actually first found about virtual microphones from Slate, Slate Digital to be exact. Now, Slate Digital presented their virtual microphone system first, and that was the thing that was going to change the world. And it honestly, we are starting to see that trend happen. And Antelope, the reason why I went with Antelope, besides me trusting the company, is that I like to keep this kind of technology all within one house. The thing about Slate is I still had to resort to another converter, which, you know, you don't know how your converters are going to really sound in comparison to. So with Antelope, I knew what I was getting was going to be 1-to-1 all the way through to the conversion. And it is, I'm looking at it right now, and it is just such a fantastic microphone to work with. So much color that you can add in post, super clean microphone, and it's also a multi-pattern mic. It can do cardioid and bidirectional really well, and it's super versatile. I can't get enough of it. If one vocalist doesn't sound right on one preset, I can switch over to another one and get it dialed in just right to fit in the mix. Now, that being said, Jason, your microphone is a dynamic mic, which means that it uses the power of inertia in order to move the coil over the magnet inside the microphone, which is a technology that's been around since, the 30s? The moving coil was first invented during the 1920s. But what we're using today is most of the time for most artists in vocals especially is a condenser microphone. Now, the thing that's beautiful about dynamics is that you actually get more headroom to work with. It can take a lot more of sound pressure level, or what we call SPL. Condensers, sometimes they're not as durable as a dynamic microphone. So if you're doing a lot of like screaming vocals and growls and stuff like that, dynamics can be very effective. But at the same time, condensers nowadays, they're so powerful. And Antelope's condenser, it's called the Edge, works wonders.
Now, I didn't touch on keyboards. Get it? Touch, keyboard. That was a bad pun. Anyway, so I think that if you have a keyboardist in the band or if you play keys, I believe you just plug your keyboard. It's typical to plug your keyboard directly into your interface because I think a lot of the sounds that keyboardists are getting these days are from the software patches, you know, like virtual amps or virtual effects or whatever. Ken, I want to let you handle more of this one because I know you play some awesome keys and I love hearing the keys in your metal music, by the way, man. So, dude, take it away on the keyboards here.
I'm using a Korg Kross. Korg is a great company for keyboards, by the way. Their Kronos is an absolute beast. But, you know, hey, it depends on the functionality that you want in your keyboard. This one that I have, you know, produces sound, so I don't necessarily need to be connected to the computer to make sound. So it's a legitimate keyboard. Others that don't make sound, that's what we call controllers. Now, for example, like our Native Instruments S88 Mark II is a controller. But the beautiful thing about the Native Instruments keyboard, for example, is that you can actually control the parameters in your DAW for your plugin when you're running something like Contact. That's a great tool if you use Contact. Now, I use actually East-West samples, which doesn't necessarily use Contact, but I also think they have a plugin, a parameter that you can actually, you know, connect it to use NKS on your DAW. But in this matter, I'm not tied exactly down to something like Contact, so versatility and is just really important to me. One of the key important things for me when playing keys is to have a pitch and modulation wheel present. And if you have other parameters to do other things like expression or of the sort, really helps. I know some composers use an EWI, which is an electronic wind instrument MIDI controller. It's just like a tube that you blow into. So if you're playing the samples of something like a horned instrument, you can get the expression of actually playing that horn. It's a really useful tool when you're composing with MIDI.
All right, guys, now let's talk about every guitar player's dream and what every guitar player thinks that they're great at. Drums. Seriously, how many times have you been at band practice and you look over and your guitar player's trying to play drums? Or if you're the guitar player, you're over there trying to play drums. Now, I have zero experience in, you know, playing or recording drums. I'm one of those guitar players who thinks that I can play drums, but I know I can't. You know, what I do, here's my method. I use either Easy Drummer, TuneTrack's Easy Drummer, or Superior Drummer to lay down my initial tracks, and then I hire a real drummer to record my tracks. So that's the route I take. But Ken is also a drummer, and a phenomenal drummer at that. You play some mean double bass. So Ken, dude, for a small home recording studio, tell us your recommendations for drums.
Yeah, dude. I mean, working with drums in your actual home is a little difficult if you don't have the space. Now, I'm always been a fan of going to a real studio to track your drums. I feel like drums are so essential in the song that you might as well cough up the dough just to get the recording of the drums right. Things like vocals, guitars, you can do that stuff pretty much at home. And as far as like writing for drums, if you're not renting a space to rehearse and play, getting an electronic drum kit can really help with composing that sort of thing. And sometimes I do that. But most of the time, I like to go to just a rental space where I have, my rehearsal gear and my drums are set up, and I just go and play, and I just rehearse that to a track. Especially with Homerik, since it's all symphonic and all this kind of stuff. So working with a track, playing drums to that feels more organic to me. And then once I'm ready, I take that, go to the studio, for the time that I'm there, and walk out with like creme de creme of the of sound for the drums, recorded at the highest resolution that I can. That's really the best way to do it.
Alright guys, so now I want to give you just kind of a quick view of my entire studio. I know you see the videos here, like me in front of the camera, but just real quickly, I'm going to just show you the entire room here. Again, it's a super small room, 10 by 11, and this is my recording studio. So on that note, no pun intended, Ken, dude, what do you recommend for room dimensions, or is that something that really doesn't matter? You know, is it something that you should just kind of work with what you have? What are some of your thoughts on the room itself, you know, for recording at home?
It's tough to say without seeing somebody's room, but ideally, studios should have somewhere between like a 30 by 20 room to work with. Now, I understand not everybody has a 20 by 30 by 20 room, or 20 by 30 room, however you want to say it. And that seems more of a luxury. But here's the thing, acoustics, you need to have a longer, more like kind of like a rectangle-ish room. Working within a square, 10 by 10, for example, is actually a nightmare for acoustics. There are things called nodes, and these nodes become very prevalent in boxy rooms or square-like rooms. They interfere. The waves of sound interfere with each other in unpleasant ways, and you're actually left with holes in your frequency. So you're not actually hearing certain frequencies, even though it's pushing those frequencies out in the speakers. It's really tricky to mix in a situation like that. But there are some ways where you can help tame those. One of the ways that you can do it, like I've actually done it, is to build acoustic treatment. You want to have treatment on the first reflection zones from your speakers, so the immediate walls that are nearby. You want your speakers to be far from the wall if you can get it. And you want to also have treatment on the ceiling, because before you even realize anything, you might not even see that there's a difference between having treatment, even as simple as having one on your ceiling. I have a floating trap actually right above my head that's 2 inches off the ceiling, and it's 2 inches thick, made of rock wool. And I highly recommend using rock wool. My wall is also completely layered with rock wool, and I've put wooden slats made from pine just to help bring back some of the pleasant reflections. And wood is a little bit warmer to listen to anyway. The sound of wood in a room, to me, just sounds a little bit more whole. But what I've got in this room is actually something very tameable, and it was the only final tweak that I really needed to do was to calibrate it. And behind me, you see over here, is a bass trap that I built, also with rock wool. And behind it, I have some foam just to help absorb some of the low frequencies that would be resonating within the room. So go to Home Depot, a little bit of a DIY project. I think I must have spent maybe like $500 on just the materials to build and construct on my own. I'm loving it, man. It sounds great in here. And my room is like an oddball room. It's kind of a studio married with kind of a kitchen. So there are some irregular walls here, which is actually a beautiful thing for sound. If you have irregular walls, it will help to bounce the sound in a way that they will not necessarily have predictable interference points. For example, in the room for a 10 by 10, if you were to listen in the middle of the room, you will just cancel out like certain frequencies. Like I want to say somewhere around like 50 hertz. which is a imperative frequency to have in your mix.
So guys, I'm going to ask you to go to my YouTube description. There's a link that goes directly to Ken's YouTube channel. That's for his band Homerik. Again, they're a metal band based out of New York, phenomenal band. They've got some really cool and unique sound. They don't sound like any other metal band out there, so I really admire them a lot. And Ken, I admire your work, dude. But yeah, guys, go to his link. Make sure you're subscribed to his channel, ding that bell, all that good stuff. If you have not subscribed to my channel yet, definitely do that. And Ken, dude, thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate the wealth of knowledge you've given us today. Are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave our metal family here?
Hey, you know, if you're a lover of music and especially a lover of metal, you know, keep doing that. Don't stop. Don't let anybody tell you to stop, because if that's what you live and breathe, I mean, what happens? You die, right? So I urge any artist to continue creating their art, even if you stumble across obstacles. All that means is that there's just more room to grow, you know? So don't be afraid of the change. I myself certainly had to go through certain things in my life in order to get where I am today. And I'm grateful for those. I couldn't be more happy than going through it, because in order to get to it, you got to go through it. So don't be afraid. Keep pushing forward. And if doing music and production is what you want, seek out the resources, you know, and learn from those who are trying to do it for a living. And if that's what you want to do, if you want to live off of your music, then, you know, take it seriously. Invest in it. That's the whole point. So without further ado, thank you so much, Jason. Rock on, brother, man. You are amazing. Killer freaking guitar player. And you know, if you're interested in Homerik, man, I am more than happy to share that with you guys as well. It's a cinematic metal type of sound. So if you put like Hans Zimmer and you know, some death metal and also some film score-y type of music together, you would get Homerik. And actually Jason's on the next record, so we are killing it, man. Anyway, all the love to you guys, all the love to you too, Jason. Thanks for having me on board, and we'll see you next time.
Ken, thank you so much once again. And guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have questions, definitely leave those in the comments. Don't forget to go to the YouTube description also, and there's a link to Ken's channel. Go there, subscribe, ding the bell. And guys, until the next video, as always, keep it metal.